Welcome everyone to episode 16 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast, the relatable fishing podcast, like we mentioned last week, with no swears. And if you're wondering, Andrew actually didn't swear last week because that would have been bad, right, Andrew?
No, I try not to swear. I try really hard.
Speaking about trying really hard, this week we're going to try really hard to convince you about something that no one needs convincing of, that chatterbaits catch fish. And they catch fish. So it's going to be a pretty easy podcast for us because we don't really have to convince you guys of anything.
And if you feel like you do need convincing, don't feel too bad because Jesse needed convincing as well back in the day. So
it's true. So anyway, this episode, like we mentioned, it's all about chatterbait fishing. And we're mostly going to cover bass fishing, but we're also going to cover a little bit about other species. But before we get into a new segment before the main topic, we're going to start off this episode with Andrew's interesting fishing fact of the week, and this is going to be a good one.
All right, so Jesse knows it's going to be a good one because I brought out the big book, the Freshwater Fishermans Bible by Vlad Evanoff.
I tell you, I'm not joking. On Amazon, some follower messaged us and said, hey, I found the book on Amazon, and I almost guarantee that book has sold more in the last 3 months from our podcast than it has in its entire life. It's trending now in the fishing book section.
So I thought, with it being bass opener when this gets released, I figured chapter 3 of this book is all about largemouth bass.
Sweet.
So some people, they might have had some smallmouth in the early season in some areas in Ontario, but largemouth, this is when you wait for bass opener.
Yep.
So we'll take a gander at some of what Vlad Evanoff has told us and written down about largemouth bass.
And if you haven't tuned into this podcast before, this book was written in 1964.
64, something like that. I always forget the year. I'll look it up right now. It is 64. I should never doubt you, Jesse.
I'm a genius. Continue.
So the largemouth bass, as he attributes it, is an especially popular species with the expert and dedicated anglers who seek a challenge, and a fish which is not too easily fooled. So it says they are. Oh, this is an interesting terminology. Largemouth bass are almost always hungry, curious, and pugnacious.
I'm going to pretend I know what pugnacious means.
I didn't even look it up. I'm like, it's probably stupid.
Yeah.
Largemouth, it says, are largemouthed black bass, as he calls them.
Yep.
Oh. So they will fill their stomachs to capacity with large fish, frogs, mice, small birds, snakes, and young muskrats, and still hit a lure or bait. That's true.
It's true. I actually did catch one time a big 6-pound largemouth, and it had a full bullhead catfish tail sticking out of its throat, and it still hit the bait. And we could feel its stomach. The catfish was at least 8 or 9 inches long.
For sure. I've caught someone spitting up some pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So some other names for the largemouth bass. Says it's also called the big-mouthed bass, green bass, green trout.
No.
Lake bass, that's all bass, mossback, and line sides.
Yeah, I could see that.
Line sides is like, it's so far out, but like, it makes sense, yes, but it's like, hey, catch any good line sides today? But like, what are you talking about, you old freak?
Yeah. Well, mossy back, remember
mossback, yeah.
G. Loomis used to have a mossy back line of rods. They were bass rods, so yeah.
So he also talks about the using different types of rods. So some anglers will use cane poles or glass poles, but the casting rod is much more sport and better.
Oh.
Now,
I agree with that.
He claimed, I thought this was false at first, because again, this is 64. He claimed that the casting rod and reel has been used for black bass for more than 100 years. And I was like, no, that's ridiculous. So I did a bit of research, and apparently bait casters have been around from the 17th century. So wow. I'm like, okay, maybe yes.
How dare you doubt Vlad?
I'm sorry, Vlad. His preferred action, if in the southern states where the bass get very large, is a medium action bait casting rod from 5 to 6 feet long and a good level winding bait cast reel. I think the pros disagree nowadays.
Yeah, but I guarantee that was
technology
a pistol
has
grip.
Changed.
That was a pistol grip for sure.
It's like, it's great for skipping under docks.
Yeah, that's about it.
So it talks about two different lures. So again, it just shows like how times have changed with how lures are called, what we call them, or what are still around even.
Yeah.
So he talks about lures for bass. There are thousands of plugs, spoons, spinners, jigs, plastic and rubber worms, eels, and other imitations. Pork chunk, pork rind, bass bugs, and flies. Popper, swimmer, gurgler, or wounded minnow. It talks about other things that largemouth bass will eat. You can use as live bait, apparently, for them. Is suckers, small bullheads, gizzard shad, small carp, goldfish, chubs, shiners, yellow perch, lamprey eels, and killifish can all be used where legal. It's like none of those are legal. It says they also have been caught on, again, lists even more, hellgrammites, salamanders, leeches, crayfish, snakes, mice, crickets, grasshoppers, locusts, grubs, and nymphs. I mean, that's a lot. Pretty much throw anything in the water is what I'm getting from this.
Yes.
It talks about, now this is interesting because we've talked about this before, about when to fish for largemouth. So he's talking about when fishing shallow water, you're best to fish early in the morning or in the evening or at night, especially for shallow water fishing. In fact, he says if you must fish during the summer months, try to do as much fishing at night as you can. Now that's something that you and I don't do just because it's difficult to do so when you don't live on the body of water, you're not staying there. But night fishing for bass, like
we have done it
in the past, but I want to try that perhaps in some of the more pressured areas because no one's doing it, and that's when they're going to be more prone to feeding when it's such an active body of water.
Yeah, especially if there's a lot of like boat activity. And I'll tell you, just to go on that point of fishing at night, I caught my biggest largemouth bass at midnight.
Yep.
6.4 pounds in a super heavily pressured Kawartha Lake.
Yes.
At night.
So
it was
we got to try that. Now it talks about, we talked before about sound underwater.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So he says, he gives the advice that canny bass anglers don't bang metal boxes, oars, or other objects against the boat. In fact, they try to do most of their fishing while sitting down. Again, not very accurate. I like to do mine standing up.
Yeah.
But again, we're I guess fishing in different ways. And the last thing I wanted to bring out about them is we talked before about a classic lure that doesn't get used very much anymore for fishing like in the weeds for largemouth is the Johnson silver minnow.
Yep.
So he talks about fishing a spoon with a weedless hook and a strip of pork rind on it. It says you cast right into the pads and pull it along the top of the plants until the spoon comes to an open pocket of water. Then let it sink, and then you jerk and reel until it comes back to the top of the pads. And when I've tried to fish the spoon before, I wasn't fishing it like that. I was just kind of slow rolling it through the weeds. But when I fish a frog, that's exactly what I'll do. But with this, it's actually sinking down. So you're fishing it like a frog across the pads, the dense pads, and then you're fishing it like you're pitching almost down in the pockets. Yeah. Like this is something that if I want to try this year because 100% that's still going to work.
Because you're covering water and then you get to a spot and your spoon flutters down.
Yeah. Like it's like pitching something in. Like you're fishing two techniques at once.
And that's probably a technique that the fish probably haven't seen in a few years.
Well, the largemouth bass, might live in Canada. I think it's around 14 years is like a record for like one of the oldest fish.
So they may have never seen this.
Yeah. If your grandfather has stopped doing this, they've never seen it before. So anyways, that's some of the largemouth bass tips and humorous anecdotes from Vlad Ivanov.
Yep. And as we mentioned, you can actually find this book on Amazon.
You can still buy it.
So
it's timely.
It's a little outdated, but it is a funny read.
It has black and white photos.
Yeah.
Hand drawn.
Anyway, I have to give Andrew a rating for this. And you know what? I always have to give him a good rating when it's Vlad because Vlad's the man. I mean, he's dead for sure, but he's the man. I'm going to give you not a number rating. I'm going to give you a letter rating this time. I'm going to give you a B+.5.
Almost that doesn't exist, but okay.
Almost an A-. You know what? I'll give you an A- because you had to go all the way to Value Village to get that book.
Yep.
All right.
I looked again at Value Village actually. I was trying to find something else with fishing, and I just couldn't find anything.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, for the next interesting fishing fact, you can try to find some other weird one. So actually now, after Andrew's interesting fishing fact, before we get into the main topic, we have a new segment, which I thought we could do sporadically throughout the season for different things. It's going to be called Triple T. This is Andrew's first time hearing this, and he thinks it's so dumb.
And I'm sure the audience agrees with me.
Triple T, techniques to try. I couldn't think of anything better. If you have anything...
Don't use the shortened version of it. Just call it what it is.
Triple T. So this week, I thought for our techniques to try, because it's bass opener, we could go over a technique that you probably haven't tried. Now, if you're an avid bass angler...
spoon through the weeds.
No, not that. But if you're an avid bass angler, you may have tried this, because it is popular in the States. But up here, not so much. So I'm going to tell you about fishing a swimming worm, or swimming a worm. And the way that you do this, there's tons of ways to do it, but the main worm that you're going to want to use is called a cut-tail worm. And I'm sure you've probably seen them at the tackle shop. The one that I'm holding in my hand, I actually picked these up at CanCast from True North Baits. They have a new worm called the rush worm, which is a cut-tail worm. Now, I picked the color Junebug because Junebug it's if you haven't seen Junebug, it's a classic. It's purple. He's got some blue fleck in there.
I can promise you Vlad fished the Junebug color.
100%. It's a classic. I picked up Junebug. I also picked up green pumpkin because you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to describe this worm to you. It is about 6 inches long, and the tail is it's almost like a little twister tail, except it's not a huge, long, curly bit. It's just a little cut tail.
Yeah. It's the shape of the actual ribbon portion of the worm. I'd almost say it's like if you took a hook made out of Jello and just stepped on it flat.
Yeah. So anyway, what it does is as you reel this worm in, the tail actually has a little kick to it. Mm-hmm. So it's not like a paddle tail wobble, but it's got a little kick to it.
It's between a twister tail and a paddle tail and how it operates.
It is a very unique action. Now, the cool thing with a cut tail worm or swimming a worm is it's a great way to cover water in a way that's slightly finessey. It's not super power fishing, but it's a way more easy to cover water with a cut tail worm, swimming a worm, than fishing, say, a stick bait or a Senko, because it's such a slow presentation.
So tell me, Jesse, how do you do so?
Well, it's easy, and I've done this for a few years. So you're going to grab yourself a cut tail worm. Again, these ones are from True North Baits, which are made in Ontario, and they actually smells pretty rancid, but in a good way. But to fish a cut tail worm or swim in a worm, you're going to get a 3 to 4/0 worm hook. You don't need an EWG or an extra wide gap hook, but a worm hook, whatever you need. And then you're going to go with a small weight, nothing too big. You're going to go with an 1/8, maybe a 1/4 at the most. And you're just going to thread that on. And I like to peg mine so that the sinker doesn't slide up and down the line. Now, the cool thing about this is it's very, very, very weedless. You can chuck this anywhere. Where I'm looking to fish a cuttail, myself, my favorite place is if you go to a flat and it's sparse milfoil, clumps here, clumps there, a little bit of sand on the bottom. Yeah. Kind of like that spot we were fishing the other day for muskie.
It's tough to get a weedless bait. Like Texas rig will get through it, but if you're using even a beaver bait and flipping it in that, you're still going to get hung up a lot more than you would on something like this. Just super slender and
exactly what Andrew said. It's slender. It slides through all the places. And the cool thing is you just chuck that thing out, you let it sink a little bit, and then you just slowly reel it in. It's a steady retrieve. And then once you get to a juicy looking spot, let it sink to the bottom, hop it around on the bottom, let it, jiggle down, do all of its goodness with that, that delicious smell. And then if there's nothing there, you just start reeling it in. And the tail itself gives the bait such a unique action as it's flicking and fluttering as you reel it into the boat. When it gets back to the boat, you cast it out again. So it is a bait that you can fish on the bottom. You can fish it slow, but it's also a bait that's really good just for covering water, and largemouth and smallmouth love that. I've also caught pike on them, walleye, anything. It's just a very natural presentation. Yeah. And tons of guys make them, tons of companies make them. But we're supporting our local sponsors here. Our previous sponsor, True North Baits. He's got some really great colors.
That's a good technique too for ones who maybe don't have. Again, a lot of our listeners don't have bass boats. We don't have a bass boat, but a lot of people don't have multiple rods out either on their boat. So that's something that's good. Yeah, it's a more of a finesse size weight that you're going to use with it, but you could also just start flipping with it as well. You can flip that worm. So it's a good option to have, something that you can cover water and also pick pockets apart with. So you don't have to you can have a rigged rod and it's now serving dual purpose.
Exactly. And like our swim jig episode a few weeks ago, it's one of those baits you can just tie on and just fish it through. Like Andrew said, you can cast it, retrieve it, you get to a hole, flip it in there, you get to a dock, skip it underneath. It's just like a bait that you can do anything. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of you probably have never tried swimming a worm. 100% try it. Super cool technique. I just threw those on the ground. So anyway, now we're going to get into our main topic. Oh, by the way, if you don't like the name Triple T, send me a message and tell me some other name. But for now, I actually like...
pity the fool who doesn't like Triple T.
So now we're going to get into our main topic about chatterbait fishing. And this is an episode me and Andrew have actually really been looking forward to because, like, I'm not even joking. We could speak for probably 3 hours on chatterbait.
It's funny because when we were talking about, when we first were starting the podcast, what topics, one of the first ones that Jesse and I both, like, had on our list that we both, like, made a list of what we said, okay, let's show this to each other, what we want to do. Both of us had... Right, one of the first ones was chatterbaits. We can do a full episode on chatterbaits. So this has been a long time coming. So
we could probably do part 1, part 2, and part 7 on chatterbaits. But so, Andrew, describe, if you don't know, maybe you've never fished a chatterbait, and we're using the name chatterbait. That's a brand name. They're actually called bladed jigs, but because that's dumb, we're just going to call them chatterbaits, okay?
Chatterbait was the original one,
yes,
which is just like we call stick baits Senkos primarily.
Just They're like how you call tissues Kleenex. It's the brand name that everyone refers to.
Yes.
They are bladed jigs.
If you don't know what a chatterbait is, it's a lot like a slobber knocker. No.
We're going to get into that.
So picture, we talked about swim jigs, so if you've been paying attention with us on our last episode, it's a jig with a skirt, and then to turn into a chatterbait, what you have, that's a spinnerbait. Why is that out?
Just to confuse you.
To turn it into a chatterbait, what you do is on original chatterbaits, they actually attach a metal blade to the actual eye of the jig, and then you have a small snap that your line now attaches to the blade. So that has, what it does, it allows that blade to move side to side, rattling against the head, causing lots of vibration, lots of movement.
Lots of noise.
And if you've never fished one of these and you cast it out and you're used to, fishing crankbaits or fishing, whatever, you'd feel vibration from a crankbait. You cast this thing out, you're like, dear God.
That's why the premium chatterbait is called the jackhammer.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like in your hands if you've ever used a jackhammer. It's just like, like it's very, very noisy and lots of vibration. And that's one of the reasons they're effective, but we're going to get into that. So basically, a bladed jig is a jig with a blade on it.
Yep.
That's as simple as it is. And they flat out smash fish. I've had a few people say, you know what? I don't know why chatterbaits are popular. I don't catch fish on chatterbaits. I don't want to sound rude, but you're doing something wrong because I've literally taken people out that have never fished, put a chatterbait on the rod and been like, just cast it out and reel it in. And they've had great days, and it requires no skill.
Yeah.
Very little skill. But anyway, so that's what a chatterbait is. And
even my dad can use it.
Yeah.
I have a story about that later. But
actually, my wife caught one of her biggest pike, and she doesn't really fish that much on a chatterbait. No problem. So that is a chatterbait. And if you're an avid angler, as most of you are, you're probably like, yeah, I got a bunch of them. So we're going to try to give you some juice on some of the tips and techniques that we've picked up over the years. So what species does it catch?
Only
largemouth bass. No. So I think a lot of people think, oh, chatterbait, that's a largemouth bass lure.
Yeah.
And it is 100%. But what else does it catch? Well, like, look at this. Right now I'm holding in my hands. This is a TNA Angry Dragon musky chatterbait. And this is the small one. This is big. This is like a 2.25 ounce chatterbait or bladed jig. And they get much bigger than this. So the size of the chatterbait doesn't really matter. Like, what's the smallest chatterbait you have?
I have actually like the micro. There's the mini chatterbaits, which they go down to, I think, 1/8 of an ounce.
Yeah.
And then I have, they go down to 3/8. No, that's 1/4 ounce. That's the one.
Okay. Fractions.
3/16 or 1/4 ounce, I think, is the mini, the mini max chatterbait, which is awesome size for smallmouth bass. But I even have the micro chatterbaits, which are 1/8 of an ounce. And there's no skirt on it, just like a tiny little jig head, like a finesse jig head, and a tiny little, like, a 1/2 inch size blade.
So literally as small as like a peanut?
Oh, as small as a not peanut in shell, a peanut or an almond. Let's say an almond.
Okay,
it's the size of an almond. I catch sunfish on these things all the time. Yeah. Like small perch. Like, this is the dink machine. Like, that's.
So they get as small as that, and they get as big as musky size chatterbaits or bladed jigs. Mm-hmm. So obviously, with such a wide range of sizes, they catch all kinds of fish. Like Andrew said, sunfish. Andrew actually caught the biggest muskie of last year on the muskie.
On this one, exactly.
That's why I brought that one. I've caught some of my biggest largemouth bass on chatterbaits.
Yeah.
Northern pike love chatterbaits.
100%.
They love them.
And how many have you lost to muskie as well? Just the regular, like, bass-sized ones?
Well, bass fishing. For bass, obviously. I've lost several to muskie right underneath the boat.
Yep.
They love them, especially even the small bass ones they love.
Yep.
And we've also caught...
Walleye?
I've caught one of my biggest walleye on a chatterbait, actually, on a bladed jig. Yeah. Actually, I caught one of my biggest walleye on a weapons of bass destruction bladed jig, but we're going to get more into some of the different brands. So really, to summarize that up, any fish will hit them. They're not just a bass lure.
Yep.
I know some guys would be like, you're fishing a chatterbait for pike. And they're like, oh, you're fishing for bass? It's like, no, pike love them too. So just don't think that they're just a bass lure.
The day that I introduced Jesse to the magical world of chatterbaits.
It is truly
we
magical.
were pike fishing in early spring, and I just started casting out. I had a white chatterbait. I still have that exact one. So I think it's a 1/2 ounce white chatterbait. I'm just casting the thing out, and I'm just catching pike after pike. Like, it was like hot morning, and it was outperforming the jerk baits, everything. And Jesse, for a long time, he thought it was like kind of gimmicky, which it started out. Yeah, every lure is gimmicky when they come up with it, because it's something different. Yeah, that's a gimmick. But they 100% work.
And they used to be gimmicky. Now they're a staple.
Yeah,
like every professional bass fisherman on the market, regardless of what brand of baits they're sponsored by, probably owns a chatterbait.
Yeah. And now not just chatterbait makes the bladed jig. Like, they had a big insurgence of popularity with the chatterbait, and now all these brands are making them. And for good reason, because they work.
And they all work. And a lot of guys will be like, oh, the actual chatterbait's the best, or I like this one better, or jackhammers are too expensive. We're going to get more into different kinds of price points and stuff after, but generally speaking, they all work. They all do almost the same thing. So just buy the one that you have confidence in, or one that looks good to you, and that's a good color, and just go out and fish it, and you'll guarantee catch fish on it. Well, not guaranteed, but you'll catch.
If that's all you had tied onto your rod and you cast it all year long, you're not going to get skunked.
Yeah. So they come in all different kinds of sizes, and they catch all different sizes of fish. Now, colors. I always like doing the color part, because you're going to ask me the color, and I'm going to say the same thing. Green pumpkin. But if you're fishing, let's just go through a few species. So for bass, if you look at my jig box, which I have right here, if you're listening to this, what's the main color you see there?
Green
pumpkin, and then obviously black and blue, black and purple, and then there's a bunch of white.
Yeah,
those are the main colors. Something dark, something natural, something bright.
Yes,
that's all you need. Dark, natural, bright. Bright for me is white and chartreuse, white. You're saying with the swim to episode, sometimes something with a little bit of contrast, like white with some black.
Yep,
just a few strands.
I've got one of my mini max that I really like is a red and black mini max. So, and it does well for smallmouth as well.
And again, for me, smallmouth, I really like white.
Yes.
Yeah, but if I could only have one color of chatterbait for any fish, it would be green pumpkin.
Yeah,
it's just such a natural color. It imitates anything.
Like, if I could have one color, and I'm biased in saying this, I would say white, because that was my first one, and it's still the one I tie on the most is a nice white chatterbait. And white is one of those colors, like white and black are one of those colors, just because of the contrast. Mm-hmm. They work almost all the time. There's not a bad time to tie on like a black or a white. It's like, oh, it's dark outside, tie in a black. Oh, it's bright outside, tie in a black. Like, it works so good, right? That's why it's a classic color. But when it comes down to chatterbaits, when I'm buying chatterbaits, I'm probably going to first look at green pumpkin. Then I'm going to get something white, usually if we're fishing for pike or smallmouth. Mm-hmm. If I'm fishing a lake that's kind of known to be murky or muddy, I'm going to probably gravitate towards like a black and blue. And then if the water is clear and it's pressured water, I don't know if it makes a difference, but I do like some like bluegill kind of patterns. Or like a perch pattern. Yeah. So like primarily green, but with some like a little bit of bright color. Like orange or blue or perch or bluegilly colors. And those, I know some people are like, it doesn't make a difference. I think it does sometimes myself. Yeah. Sometimes having something that matches the hatch exactly, especially on pressure water, like we're saying, like some people, they're like, oh, I live in Northern Ontario. The fish aren't as pressured, but like if you live where we live, one of the highest populated cities in the world, lots of people fish the lakes that we do. So these fish, they're not smart, but I think they kind of recognize some colors after a while.
after they've been pinned a few times. So anyway, colors it's not crazy. Keep it basic. That's all you need. Like I said, dark, bright, natural.
Yep.
And for muskie, you can't go wrong with black and orange.
Yeah.
I've had so many muskie guys tell me that. I'm like, what color should I get? They're like, black and orange. It's like they don't even think about it. Okay. And it worked for Andrew last year. Actually, funny story about that fish. We were fishing on one of the Kawartha lakes, and it was late September.
Yeah.
And we were going up for muskie, and we're just starting to get it's probably the second year that we've actually really gone hardcore into actually muskie fishing.
Targeted muskie specifically.
Yeah.
That's it.
And we were fishing, and right away in the morning, I caught one.
Yeah.
I caught one on a
You borrowed my suic and caught a muskie because I'd never caught one on a suic. And I'm like, hey, I use it. I don't have confidence in it. Nails a muskie.
Yeah. Well, I had to tune it for him first.
Yeah.
But then I caught a fish on it. Then he wanted it back. So I was just trying different baits. And that day, it was one of those crazy days. We raised 9 to 10 fish.
Yeah. And we saw like 12.
We each caught one. Yeah. And then we were going down this little back bay area. And I was in the front of the boat, and I was looking straight down, and I already caught a fish. And since I'm a nice guy, I see this big muskie just sitting down towards the bottom, and I was like, "Oh, Andrew, muskie." What I should have said was, "Look over there," and then started jigging myself to catch it. But I said to Andrew, "Look, muskie," and he was just like frantically looking for a lure to put on.
I had a couple rods with me, and I had a topwater, and this muskie just sitting like down at the bottom. Like clearly that's not going to work. So the only thing that I had, and I think I had to put it on quick. I think I had a fast hatch. I didn't even have it on. I had 2 topwaters on. So I quickly grabbed what was sitting closest to me, which was the Angry Dragon.
Which is mine.
Yeah, which is his. He let me borrow it. So I was borrowing his.
Well, I didn't let him. He just took it.
Oh, come on. So he had never caught anything on this. And so I was using it because I wanted to try it out. And so I put it on. It's like I flip out. And it's like, I think it's back there. It took me a while. It was now 10 feet behind the boat before I had my line in the water.
Yeah.
And I could see him just like dragging it right across his face. And it gave a nice little jerk. And he just like nails it.
Yeah.
Oh. Just see him take it.
That was stuffed awesome. That thing in the net. It was a good fish too. Yep. So that just goes to show you that chatterbaits or bladed jigs, they work for many different species of fish. So now that you've bought your chatterbait, okay. Yes. And again, we're going to go into some of the brand names and different, price points after, but you don't just fish a chatterbait without a trailer. It's kind of, you can, but I'd always recommend to put a trailer on it. Just gives it a little bit more action, a little bit more bulk, sometimes a little bit of scent. What's your favorite trailer? If you could only have one trailer for chatterbaits for bass, we're talking bass because it's bass opener this weekend.
I would say a fluke.
A fluke?
I like something. So Jesse and I, we have differing opinions for good reason on both sides for what kind of, just like that. So this is the razor. Yeah, razor shads from Z-Man. These are designed to go on a chatterbait.
Yeah.
But it's a little fluke, segmented fluke, and I'll put that on the back of a chatterbait. And I like it because as a chatterbait is vibrating through the water, it's imparting the action to the trailer. So it starts really like whipping back and forth. I'll even use a Senko, but I think I like these just because they give a nice bit more bulk to it as well.
Yeah.
It's a good morsel of food. So for me, I would have to say a fluke is one of my favorite things to put on the back of a chatterbait because I love having that strong vibration in the front, and then it just goes back into this like whippy tail on the trailer itself. And
I've watched a lot of videos of pros talking about what trailers they specifically like on their chatterbaits, and a lot of them that get really picky. And I mean, money's on the line for them, so they get really picky. Mm-hmm. And they're like, you don't want something that has a lot of action, because the chatterbait, like Andrew said, with the blade whipping back and forth, it's moving the head. Yeah. So that blade's clacking against the head. The head's moving back and forth. So that body and the hook is moving. So if you have a bait, like Andrew said, like the Z-Man razor shad or just like a fluke with a thin tail, that thing's just whipping around back there. Now, if you had a big paddle tail or something that's trying to swim this way, it can kind of like contradict or like counteract the natural action of the chatterbait. Because the cool thing about a good chatterbait is it does hunt.
Yes.
And hunting means if you're reeling it in, it'll be going straight, then all of a sudden it shoots off to the side. It's like the blade just like, it like hesitates and then gets pulled off to the side, and then it'll like click back to the center and then click off to the side.
It's essentially an imperfect hitch point. So with a crankbait, it's a fixed blade that you're pulling against. It's not moving. As soon as it moves, and they make crankbaits now that have a loose lip for that hunting action. So as it's coming across, there's always minor differences with whatever it's going through the water with as to how it's going to push against its blade, and all of a sudden has a slightly different angle. It's going to cause a slightly different vibration this way, and then slightly different this way. It's never exactly the same.
It's random
because it's all freely moving.
Yeah.
So it gives it that hunting action.
And that hunting random action triggers strikes.
Yeah.
Sometimes bass will just smash anything that you throw at them. Sometimes they'll follow it, and then you'll need to trigger the bite.
Mm-hmm.
And that hunting action where it'll just be, and it shoots off to the side, they just think it's a minnow swimming along, and all of a sudden, oh, it noticed I'm here, and it shoots off to the side to swim away, and the bass is like, nope,
Yep.
dead, So
now that's conjecture. We're trying to speak for the bass, and the bass isn't here to defend itself. We don't know exactly if that's what it's thinking.
Lawyers in court. But that hunting action, and that's what the difference is. Some people say, are more expensive chatterbaits worth the money? More expensive chatterbaits, in my opinion, and what I've heard from other people, and I found it myself, is they oftentimes hunt better.
Mm-hmm. Better hook, oftentimes.
Yep. Tied skirt,
so it's not losing its hair.
Yeah. But that hunting action is really perfected on the more pricier chatterbaits. You can still catch fish on a budget chatterbait, 100%, but you may get slightly better action out of a better one.
When someone hasn't tried a chatterbait, I look, go to your local tackle shop, get the original chatterbait. It still is like what, $7 and something cents,
$6.99.
Yeah. So for $7, you can get a chatterbait that works. It 100% works. That's the first one that I got, and I still have it. Is the original chatterbait.
I have a bunch of originals.
I love it. It works really good. It's still got a good hook. You can resharpen it. It's fine. And when you put a Z-Man trailer on it, you just a little dab of super glue, and that trailer stays on forever.
Yeah. And
I still have the same trailer on. It's its second year running now. Third year running now on that one trailer.
And if a pike bites you off, you're out $7, not $20.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the reason we're going to go back to trailers. Why sometimes a trailer with less action, what seems like less. I've had people say, oh, I don't like the razor shads. They don't have any action. They do. Reel the chatterbait past you while you're fishing. Yeah. You can see that thing whipping back and forth.
Look down on it from straight above, and you'll see that trailer whipping back and forth.
And a lot of the popular chatterbait trailers, like the Yamamoto Seiko, they're designed like that. They don't have a kicking tail. They just have a segmented body that goes with the natural action of the chatterbait and really helps that hunting action go. On the other side, and I agree with Andrew 100% on that, I fished with a guy, not Andrew, and his favorite trailer, and I cannot convince him otherwise, is a rage craw, or like a craw. And to me, it has too much flappy action in the back. Mm-hmm. He slams on them. So
it's got a lot of lift.
Yeah. It has to do with confidence, but it's different. It's situational too, like Andrew said. Yeah. You have a double craw, and my favorite double craw is the Z-Man Helicraws. For me, because again, we can super glue it on and it lasts a long time. Yeah. This thing will last multiple
the claw
days.
Doesn't rip off after like a sunfish pecks at it.
And it's basically like a double torso. Just it flaps in the back like that, and it does produce a lot of lift. So again, if you want to fish deeper, use something with a thin tail. If you want to fish, say you're fishing shallower or above weeds, something with more lift will help keep the chatterbait up. Because chatterbaits do have quite a bit of lift themselves because of the blade. So that's another trailer style that's very popular. And especially, I do like a craw trailer for pike. A big white chatterbait with a big white craw on the back just flapping around. It doesn't look like anything natural, but pike don't seem to mind. And I'd say probably one of the most popular trailers is just a paddle tail. Yeah. And I do use them from time to time. And again, I'm kind of picky. I like paddle tails that don't have a crazy amount of kick, if that makes sense. I like the ones that have a thinner tail section. So the tail is pretty much just whipping around, but the body's kind of staying still. And one of my favorites that's very similar to that is Limestone Lures Rib Kicker. That's done well for me. I stocked up at CanCast this year. I got a bunch of his colors. Jeff makes them. And it's just like a perfect size, 3.5 inch. Yeah. Floppy little tail in the back.
And the thing is too, so you have, again, with trailers, if you have one that is slender, you have the chatterbait is not as at a disadvantage isn't really the right word, but it is performing as intended with lots of vibration. If you, for some, again, they have the stealth chatterbait. It has a softer vibration. They have the big blade, which is even more vibration, or the tungsten head of the jackhammer has more vibration. So there are times when you want a bit less or a bit more. So you can use your trailer to your advantage. If you're noticing that, if you get the feeling maybe this is a bit too aggressive for a day like this, whenever you're fishing, maybe put on a trailer that has like a craw, like a paddle tail, that can actually pull out a bit of that vibration from the actual chatterbait itself, and might be the deal that day.
Yeah, exactly. And there's tons of options. So like you can really, pinpoint the right one for whatever conditions. You can experiment, because really, if the fish are biting, you could probably put anything on there. You could put a gummy worm on the back of a chatterbait and still catch fish.
People have done it.
Yep. So definitely paddle tail, 100%. And again, our favorite is one of our previous sponsors, Jeff from Limestone Lures. Check him out. Another trailer that I really fell in love with as soon as it came out. Again, Z-Man. We're big Z-Man fans.
I like it because I buy one pack and then it's just never there.
The Z-Man Goat.
Yep.
And if you're not familiar with the Goat, it's technically classified as a creature bait. It's basically just a grub with two little kicking legs on the back.
So that exactly right there is the trailer that is on my original chatterbait. And that was the first trailer I put on. And I replaced it, but the one that's on it right now currently is a white Z-Man Goat, and it's all torn up and it's kind of green color now.
Yeah. And the cool thing with Z-Man, like we said, they stretch.
Yeah.
Like I'm using a 3.5 inch bait. I'm stretching it. How long would you say that?
1.5 feet.
At least. And they last a long time. But
and the big thing with Z-Man too, which is why we love them, is when you're fishing chatterbaits, and I've had it so many times with my micro ones especially. I for a long time didn't have. Well, Z-Man recently came out with the micro line, which is I love.
Yeah. Because
it's perfect for my micro chatterbaits. But I would have to use I can't remember the name brand of these, like these small like micro baits and like crappie baits, sorry. And what happened is I'd reel it in, and I'm going for sunfish with these micro chatterbaits, and they come up and pick it off, and no, there goes your whiptail, or there goes your little paddle tail. And they can try on Z-Man, and it doesn't matter. You can pick at this thing over and over, and like it's not coming off.
It's a rare day when a bass and a sunfish can nip off a leg.
And the only thing that pretty much will is a pike coming along and just happens to like get that, twist its head, and actually take it off full. Because most of the time they'll put a slit in it and that's it.
2 or 3 years ago, I went pike fishing, and I was using white chatterbaits with this exact white 3.5 inch Goat Z-Man trailer. And I went through three days of fishing on the same trailer. Yeah. And there were cuts in it, but it held together. And then I mostly just took it off because it got all gross and dirty. Yeah. It still was working.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, for sure. And there's tons of brands. Like basically anything with kicking feet, fantastic.
Yeah.
But we're big fans of the Z-Man stuff. And again, we like to support our local bait makers as much as we can, but we like to buy all kinds of random stuff. You should see our tackle boxes and tackle rooms. So much stuff.
Tackle rooms.
I have a tackle room at my house. Yeah, I
have a tackle hovel.
Yeah. And some other baits that I have had success on chatterbaits. Again, sometimes it doesn't matter what you throw on a chatterbait.
Yep.
Hey, you're out of trailers? I'm sure you got a Mr. Twister in your box, okay? The double Mr. Twister, just a classic. This is the 4-inch double tail. I think that's a classic.
Yeah.
And the double tail works good on so many things, but that on the back of a chatterbait, I've done good on.
Yep.
No problem. And then even if the single ones too. My favorite one is the 5-inch Berkeley Power Grub. It's great. It just has a little flickering, snake-like action behind the chatterbait. It's a little more subtle, and it works good.
The old bungee worms too. I'll cut a bit of the head off just so it's a bit shorter. You get this long bungee tail off.
I wish they still made those. The Berkeley bungee baits.
I've got some. I picked some up at CanCast and found some in some old tackle box that I acquired. So I've got an assortment of some older plastics which I kind of hold and pull out from time to time.
If you're old enough to know what the Berkeley bungee baits are, how's your back feeling today? So anyway, we kind of covered a little bit of chatterbaits and some of the ones that we like. We covered colors, sizes, trailers. Now we're going to cover when to use them. So I'm not even going to say all the time, but basically all the time. But when do you, Andrew, like say we're going on the lake, and I know oftentimes when we start fishing, we rig up our rods before launching the boat. And oftentimes I know Andrew has a chatterbait tied on already. And oftentimes I have a chatterbait combo in like already, like a specific combo for chatterbait. So like, when do you chuck a chatterbait for bass? We're talking bass this week.
Yeah. So for bass, species wise, largemouth, I would say anytime I'm fishing the outskirts of a weed line, a chatterbait's one of my first things I go to, because when you rip it through those weeds, you get that reaction strike. So another feature of the chatterbait that happens is when it comes up, you'll feel it vibrating in your rod. It pulls into a weed, and you just feel the vibration stop, and you give a sharp tug on your rod, and it just like that blade slices through that weed, it's like gone, and it just rips forward.
Yeah, and the vibration starts again. It's like,
yeah, and that reaction strike is fantastic, and that's another reason why I love them is especially if you're trolling. I'll troll weed lines and stuff with them sometimes, and you'll know if it's working or not.
Yeah, you can tell because you watch your rod just bumping up and down, all of a sudden it stops.
Yeah. So for largemouth, I'll use it. I will use it even on calm days because it's subsurface. I'll use it on a calm day, on a windy day. Windy days especially, they stand out. The more disturbed the water is, I really like a lot of vibration. For smallmouth, I would say I found anything that's, again, maybe because I'm using my white one primarily, but on an overcast day, I find chatterbaits work really well. I'm not sure if that's just because with overcast is generally there with storms coming in or whatnot, and they are subsurface feeding mainly.
Yeah,
they're kind of going a bit deeper, but on overcast, a chatterbait's basically always with me.
Interesting. Everything Andrew told you is true. But really, like, there's no wrong time to chuck a chatterbait. I said a slaughter bait, but a chatterbait.
We should make our own and call it that.
Yeah.
Patent pending.
It's basically just a chatterbait, but the blade is a razor blade. It really is weedless and fishless, really.
Hope it doesn't get tangled on your line.
Or you hooks at it and hits you in the face.
All right, Pike, coming back at you.
You just see Andrew, want to know how I got these scars. Chatterbait fishing. So I think when we discussed 2 weeks ago about swim jigs, we were kind of like, if it's calm water, I like a swim jig because it's more subtle. As soon as there's a little bit of a ripple and I can get away with it, I'm going to use a chatterbait if I can. And for me, swim jigs are more like heavy cover situations, and chatterbaits are if I can get away with it. So obviously you can't throw chatterbaits into thick weed because you'll just get snagged up. There's no weed guard. I know there is one chatterbait or two chatterbaits out there with a weed guard, but generally speaking, they don't have weed guards. Yeah. They're designed, like Andrew said, to rip through weeds. That causes a reaction bite, right? Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite, we're just going to go right into retrieves now.
Yep.
One of my favorite techniques, like Andrew said, is ripping through grass. And you need to be ready for this technique because it's pretty, muscle. Yeah. You need some muscle for this.
And you want some braid on your reel.
Because you're going to be casting out into sparse weeds or weed edges. And everyone always thinks, oh, weed edges, it's a super defined weed. No, it's not. No. It's literally a thick clump of weeds transitioning to no weeds. There's still weeds in the middle.
Yeah.
That's where you're casting. And the fish cruise along those edges looking for food. So as you're reeling in your chatterbait, it's going to get stuck on a piece of milfoil or a piece of coontail or a piece of cabbage, whatever weed is there. And as you feel, like Andrew said, the great thing about chatterbait is you can feel when it's fouled up because that blade is like, and then it just stops.
Yep.
And you're just reeling it in and your rod kind of starts loading up.
Yep.
Generally speaking,
even if a weed slides down your line, if there's like weeds floating on the surface, as soon as it gets to your bait, you'll feel it. Same thing. You just jerk it, it'll start vibrating again. It cuts it off.
And then sometimes you'll rip it and then it still won't work and you rip it again and then it rips through. Yeah. So you can really tell when it rips through. And the cool thing is, and this has happened to me many, many times, when you rip it through, sometimes you'll just set the hook right into a fish. Yeah. Because there's probably a fish following your chatterbait and then your chatterbait gets stuck on the weed and the bass is like, okay, because that's not really weird.
Yeah.
They see sunfish or baitfish swimming around and hiding in weeds and then all of a sudden it just darts forward. And the bass is like, oh, it's trying to get away. And it swims up and hits
Big mistake.
Yeah. So sometimes you'll be ripping it and then there'll just be a fish on it. It's kind of like ripping hair for walleye, like ripping jigs. You're ripping through weeds and you're causing a reaction bite. And that is an amazing technique. And it works for everything.
Yeah.
Walleye, muskie, pike, bass. Works really good for bass. Another technique, and this is one that maybe not a lot of people have thought of, is bouncing the bottom. Mm-hmm. Now, bouncing the bottom, it's preferred to have a specific kind of chatterbait.
Yeah. They have the football heads.
Yeah. So the chatterbait
hook on it.
The Freedom chatterbait is this. It's called the CFL.
Yeah.
And it has an actual metal football head.
Yeah.
And they come in heavy weights. So they're actually designed to like bounce along the bottom. And I picked up a few. Actually, I lost one to a muskie a few years ago, but I actually picked up another one, and they sink like a rock.
Yeah.
chatterbaits have a lot of lift, so this actually has a
I
slightly
love that
smaller
thing,
blade.
fishing like flats and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
especially like a sand flat or a mud flat, and it's just like rummaging through the bottom and just vibrating the whole time
It's
doing
just
it.
scurrying along
yeah.
the bottom. And I really think it just imitates like a crawfish, just
Yeah.
you know,
or a catfish like just
Yeah.
rooting around. Yeah.
or anything really. But yeah, it's the Freedom Tackle CFL, and
yeah.
they're a little more expensive. I think they're like $14-15, but
Yeah.
we've done really well on them. And for that, I like to put on actually a crawl trailer, because I feel like I'm going to fish it like a craw. And the cool thing is, it doesn't have to be a steady retrieve. You can reel it and just feel it clicking down there, like with the blade, and then just kill it and let it sit on the bottom, and then just jerk your rod hard, and the thing will just pop off the bottom.
Yeah.
Just like a crayfish. You know, when a crayfish is trying to escape, it pops off the bottom.
Yeah.
Plus you have the vibration of the blade whipping back and forth. And that, again, it's a reaction strike.
Yeah.
That's a really cool technique. And the last technique I'm going to tell you, it's a little bit of a secret. Andrew, don't listen. Now, chatterbaits aren't the best around wood because they snag. Now, some people will be like, oh, I fish them in wood all the time. You can. They're not the best at it. No, like, it's not your number one wood bait. But ever try pitching a chatterbait around docks or wood? Forget it's a chatterbait. Pretend it's a jig with added vibration.
And I will say the Z-Man Cross Eyes is one of the weed guards.
Yes.
One with
Metal
the
weed
weed
guard.
guard. And I really like that one because that is the one I use around timber.
Yes.
So
it's designed for that.
Yeah. So it's got a weed guard, but it's a timber guard.
Yes. And it works good.
Yeah.
But pitching regular chatterbaits without a weed guard around docks, so say there's like a deep dock or a deep laydown or just like holes in the weeds, pitch a chatterbait in there, and as it sinks, it's not going to vibrate as it sinks, but it's going to fall down. The trailer's going to give it action. But then when you jerk that thing up, it's like up and then it falls down again. It is something that bass have never seen.
Yeah.
Maybe they have around you, but like it's something that no one does.
Yeah. Well, think of a regular like flipping jig. A lot of them have these little like rattles, right?
Yep.
It's like, oh, it rattles. Like, really, like how much is it going to rattle if you pull it forward? It has like all the weight goes to the back of the rattle, and then it sinks. It goes to the front of the rattle.
Yeah.
It's not rattling a lot.
Yeah, unless
All of
you're
a sudden
hopping it on the bottom.
Yeah. So now all of a sudden you have a chatterbait, and when you rip that, 100% you'll feel it on your rod. Like it says, it's like a small aircraft starting out, like
Yeah. So it's just one of those techniques that I've seen guys do, like that I fished with, and I was blown away by the results. And they were just like, buddy, no one does this. And I'm like, now.
I was with Jesse and I'm like, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start flipping a chatterbait. I thought of it. He's like, that's a thing. I'm like, oh.
Guys are like, no one does this. I'm like, well, now over 1,000 AOA listeners will. I'm in trouble. So, and again, there's tons of different techniques. Those are just the ones that we're going to talk about today. Now we're going to kind of go through gear. We're going to keep this, we're going to do 2 segments. Basic and bougie. So if basically what rod is the rod we always talk about, we talked about it 3 weeks in a row now, and Andrew's going to say it now.
A medium heavy 7-foot bait caster.
Yeah. And I like to add 7 to 7.3.
Yeah.
7 is a bit short. Some people like it. 7.3 is good. I like anything in that range. Usually when I'm buying a rod, most of the medium heavies I have are either 7.1, 7.2, or 7.3. It's weird. They're all like that. But And some guys will be like, oh, 7.1's too short. I like a 7.2. You'll never feel an inch on the end of the rod, seriously. But it's all personal preference. But basically what we're talking about is a medium heavy rod. Mm-hmm. And we're talking fast action. We don't want no extra fast action. A fast action rod is a nice flex to it. And what do you like, 30, 40 pound braid?
Yeah, so generally I will use 30 pound braid. If I'm casting on the same rod that I flip with, I'll have 50, 60 pound braid on.
Yep.
But yeah, primarily I like to fish 30 pound braid for kind of all around on a bait caster.
Exactly. And that combo, like we discussed in many podcasts, is a combo that can chuck almost anything. Mm-hmm. And I think if you watch, a lot of, tournaments, or you're into the whole, Bassmaster and stuff, you may think, oh, I need a specific chatterbait rod to catch fish. That is not true. You can use any rod to chuck a chatterbait. Mm-hmm. You will probably hook and land more fish on a specific chatterbait rod. I don't care what anyone says. Mm-hmm. Specific rods are designed to do a specific thing better. That's like having different golf clubs and being like, you can putt with a driver.
Like,
you can.
Technically, yeah.
But it doesn't work
I've
as
seen
good
Tin Cup
as something, that is specifically designed to do a specific task. So like Andrew said, if you're using a 7-foot medium heavy with 30-pound braid, there is a pretty big flaw in that combo for chatterbaits, is it doesn't have enough bend, in my opinion.
Yeah. Not enough. Across that combo, your elasticity is low because you're fishing braid, stiff rod.
Yeah. And not that a fast action rod is overly stiff, but we went through the phase of, not the phase, but we went through using just our regular rods for chatterbaits, and we realized what happened. We were losing lots of fish right at the boat.
At the boat. So primarily when you're at boat side, we talked about this before, is the fish has the most leverage at that point in time to throw that hook, to create slack in your line, momentarily slack, to throw that hook. And another downside then to the chatterbait is you have a large single hook, but with a big weight on the end of it that they can use to start twisting that bait around in their mouth. So as soon as they get that, again, right beside the boat, you're about to land it, and it jumps just before you get it under the net. Yeah. And it's, boom, there goes your chatterbait. Like, it sucks.
And what usually happens, you get, like, say, like a big 4-pound just smallmouth, and it goes right under the boat. It dogs right underneath. And your rod's bent underneath the boat. And as long as your rod is bent,
you're fine.
You're fine. But what happens? Usually they swim up fast and jump. And as soon as your rod straightens, because the line went slack, that thing's shaking its head, and it uses that leverage, and that bait just flies out. Chatterbaits are probably one of the worst baits that a fish can throw. Yep. Because like jigs have a weed guard that kind of hold the hook in, but chatterbaits don't.
Yeah. Unless you're using one that does, but still most of the time you're not.
So say you're getting a little more serious and you say you want to get an extra rod. Say you fish chatterbaits all the time. And you're like, you know what? That's what happened to me. I was like, I love chatterbait fishing. Yep. I want to get a specific rod because I always have one tied on. I'm just going to get a specific rod for chatterbaits. There's a few different options. You can either go with a glass rod, a composite rod, or a graphite rod. And I'm going to put graphite rod into 2 sections. So let's start with that. So like we said, a stiff graphite rod with braid, not the best. Yeah. One easy way to switch that quick is to do what?
Is to add a monofilament leader, and then you have some stretch.
Yeah. Or run full mono, or what most people do, run full fluoro. Fluoro mono have a lot of stretch. Yeah. If you're adding a leader to get that stretch, you might want to add a fairly long one.
Yeah. So when adding a leader, if I'm doing it to add that stretching capacity, I don't need to stretch when the fish is like 30 feet out of the boat or 20 feet away from the boat. I need it when it's within 10 feet of that boat. So if I have at minimum a 10-foot leader, then I know that it'll stretch to 13. I have 3 feet of elasticity on that 10-foot leader to be able to get that fish landed. Give me a bit more wiggle room when I'm fighting it boat side. Because that's the rest of your line. Doesn't matter what's on your spool. It's what's actually off of your spool fighting the fish. So you don't need it to be 40 feet long and now you got to take off a whole bunch of braid. Just throw on like 15 feet is generally what I'll do. And then I get to tie a few knots in there before I have to replace the leader. But that gives you that extra elasticity close to the boat side.
Exactly. And you need that.
Yeah.
And I know some people be like, oh, you don't need that at all. That's fine. If you're catching every fish on braid and a stiff rod, you must be some kind of a genius, but good for you. So you can either add stretch to a stiff combo, or if you still want to use braid, use a stretchy rod. So I have had tons of chatterbait rods, and I'm going to tell you quickly what I like. So,
and then I'll tell you kind of a budget option you could do.
Sounds good. So the first rod that I bought a composite rod. And if you know anything about rods, a composite rod is a mixture of glass, like fiberglass, and graphite. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Glass is kind of known as being really heavy, and graphite is light. So you get that in between. You got a rod that's, still bendy, but fairly light. And in my opinion, that's probably one of the best rods if you're going to get into it, because they're fairly light. They cast well.
They're still versatile.
Yeah, and they're not super bungee like a glass rod. So you can even chuck spinner baits on it, crankbaits, topwaters, stuff like anything with treble hooks. Really good. Chatterbaits, great. So a 7.2 medium heavy glass rod or composite rod, perfect. Used that for a few years. I had the Daiwa Tatula glass rod. I think it was like $150, $160. Still have it. Great rod. The next rod I bought an evergreen glass chatterbait rod. Now, a lot of pros that are, known for fishing chatterbaits use glass rods. And a glass rod is fiberglass. They are thick, they're heavy, but there's something magical about them. They bend almost down to the handle. One. You hook a fish on a chatterbait, as long as you keep the line tight, that fish isn't getting off.
And it's a lot easier to keep the line tight because that thing just bent over the whole time.
It's a shock absorber the whole time. Any surge, any jump, that line is going to be tight into the chatterbait. Again, it's a heavier rod. Some guys are like, you know what? that rod is so heavy. And to give you an example of the weight
Heavy as
difference,
in literal weight.
yeah, so like a regular graphite rod, you're looking at probably like, high 3 ounce to 4 ounce range. A glass rod that's similar is 6.5, 7 ounces. So like it's a fair bit heavier.
Yeah.
Some people don't care. They're like, that's fine. I love glass. Some people are like, I cannot stand the extra weight. So it's really, you got to try it. And then the third rod that I bought was a graphite rod that is built like a fiberglass rod. So I bought the St. Croix Victory. It's called the Rip and Chatter rod. It's a 7.2 heavy. It's not really heavy. It feels like a medium heavy. And it is a graphite rod. It's a heavy, but it loads. It's a slow action. Or not slow. It's a moderate action. So the rod bends like in half. But the difference is between that and a glass rod is it's super light. It's like 3.6 or 3.7 ounces. The same rod in glass is like 2 ounces more. So that rod, again, I have a bunch of rods that do the exact same thing. I like to experiment, but that rod is a gem. Yeah. You can cast chatterbaits all day long. And the cool thing about glass and graphite rods that are slower is you don't really feel the bite, which sounds weird. So as you're reeling in a chatterbait, I'm bad for this. As soon as I feel like anything different, I'll just set the hook. So if I'm using a graphite rod with braid and I feel that blade just, and all of a sudden it stops, that usually means that a fish has come up behind it. And what happens with bass is they create a vacuum. And sometimes that blade it'll stop as it's getting sucked back. And I'll think I have a fish on and I just swing on it and I pull it right out of the fish's mouth before it closes his mouth. So the cool thing about using some rod that has less feel, like a glass rod, is you can't feel that. It's dull the senses. They're not sensitive. They're just, it dulls the sense.
You're not gonna be like, I won't feel it. Like, you'll feel the weight of a fish. You'll know when you have a fish still.
So you won't feel the fish grab it, but you'll just be reeling in. It's the coolest thing ever. And then all of a sudden your rod will just start loading. And then you just reel into it. And since chatterbait has an exposed hook that's razor sharp, that hook just goes right into it. You don't even have to set the hook. You just reel into the fish and then boom, it's hooked.
Yeah. You apply pressure. That's a lot of pressure
it's
on that.
Much like crankbait fishing. And Brett Height, who is one of the most successful chatterbait fishing pros out there, he uses a glass rod and he says to treat chatterbaits like a crankbait. Cast them out, reel them in, let the rod load. Don't even set the hook. Just pull back and reel fast and you'll get the fish in. So again, gear, it sounds super convoluted and definitely I got all bougie there, but you already have a rod that can cast chatterbaits.
If you and that's what I was going to say. If you have a rod that you like to use for crankbaits, and generally if it's something with any cast and retrieve bait, you don't need to have that sensitivity. When a fish hits, you're going to know it's how you have a fish. You don't need to feel like a bite on slack line with, like you're drop shotting or something like that.
Yeah.
So with because, like Jesse said, you fish like a crankbait, you're casting, retrieving. You pretty much always have, unless you are, flipping it yourself, most of the time when you're fishing it, your cast retrieve, you always have full contact with your line tight. One of the things cheap budget rods I was going to mention is the ugly stick is something that it's not high end, it's not fancy. It's the ugly stick that we all have heard of for years.
They're great chatterbait
It's the number one selling rod because it's dirt cheap.
Yeah.
And they are, you get the original ones, and like the classic, and it's a glass rod. That's why they bend so much, is because it's fiberglass. So it's a cheap option if you wanted to get one that you wanted to cast for chatterbaits or for crankbaits, use it for all your cast retrieve stuff. That's a really good budget option for you if you don't want to go into the high end.
And honestly, even the Ugly Stick Elite, the one with the cork handle, I actually really like that rod. I wouldn't even be that mad if I had to use that for chatterbaits because they were great.
Yeah.
You don't, again,
I wouldn't use it for drop shot.
You can spend a lot of money on a chatterbait rod, but it's one of those rods that you don't have to. Kind of like a frog rod. Put your money into rods that are more about sensitivity. All right. So, and for reel wise, we're mostly talking about bait casting equipment. You can use a regular, 6 to 7 foot medium heavy spinning rod with, whatever line you like. But for bait casting rods, I prefer a slower gear ratio. I like a 6:1 or 6:3 to 1. I used to use faster reels, but I found that I retrieve too fast. So I like to use a slower reel. Yeah.
You can slow down, just Jesse has a hard time slowing down.
Yeah. You can, I'd say a good overall gear ratio in general is just 7 to 1. Yeah. I like a slower reel for chatterbaits. But anyway, that's chatterbaits. We're going to go very quickly through some of our favorite chatterbaits that we've used. I know Andrew has the one up the front that he's going to talk about.
Yes. So this is the big blade, which, as its name implies, has a bigger blade.
Here's my other one.
Comes in a slightly You can't get it in heavier sizes, but I think you can still get it down to, I think it's a 1/4 ounce or 3/8. I think is the latest one for these.
I'm not sure. This is a half, and that's a 5/8.
Yeah. So these are really nice, and the bigger blade gives a lot of lift, but it really thumps. And this is one of my favorite largemouth bass and pike baits to use.
Yeah, and they're great for muskie too. The other one that we recommend, like Andrew said, this is the original chatterbait. And again, it has a big 5/0 hook, good colors. You can get different blade colors, like gold, silver. There's some painted ones, I think. And again, the main good thing about this one is it's nothing fancy. There's no good hook keeper. The hook is okay, but it's $6 or $7, and they catch fish.
Yep.
You don't have to worry about that either. One of my favorite chatterbaits is actually, where is it? Right here.
How can you tell it's his favorite?
Well, there's no paint left on the head, and the blade's all chotched up. So a few years ago, I bought a bunch of weapons of bass destruction bladed jigs. And they're a bit of a smaller profile. They're really good for smallmouth. I was actually fishing a buddy tournament on Rice. Was it Rice Lake or Buckhorn? One of the lakes anyway, one of the Kawartha lakes. And our team came in first, and I caught 3 of the 5 winning fish. And I was using this exact bladed jig all day, the green pumpkin. Actually, my buddy is a spinnerbait guy. He was fishing spinnerbait, and I was fishing bladed jigs. And he literally, he was like, oh, I think chatterbaits are stupid. By literally the second hour, I'd already had a few fish in the live well. He bored one of these for me and put it on. So they work really good. And again, it's a local company, Weapons of Bass Destruction. He has a bunch of really, really good colors.
Yep.
Like, check out this color.
This is one of those cross eyes as well that has the
weed guard.
The weed guard on it. Oh, that's just the classic black, all black.
This is a cool color. It's Weapons of Bass Destruction. It's black with a black head with a black blade. Woo. Okay, and then...
Do you have a Mini-Max in there?
No, I don't.
I forgot to bring mine, you see, so...
And one of the most popular chatterbaits out there, and you get a lot of questions about these, is the jackhammer. Yeah. And the reason you see a lot of these is because a lot of the pros use them. They're actually... The main thing that people talk about is how expensive they are. Because the jackhammer is made by Evergreen, which is a very expensive, bougie Japanese brand. And these chatterbaits are about $23 to $25.
They are still a licensed chatterbait. It's not just a bladed jig. They are chatterbait. So you have the original chatterbait, which is $7, and then you have the jackhammer, which is $26.
No, it's 23.
23. I thought.
So it depends where you buy them. But anyway,
I always see it for like $25.99. I'm like, yeah, I'll just get the regular, please.
Yeah. So
or I'll get the I forget what it's called. It's like a tournament grade, but it's not quite jackhammer. So it has a tied skirt and a nice hook keeper and stuff, or bait keeper on it.
Yeah. So here's my main chatterbait that I mostly always have tied on. It's a green pumpkin 3/8 chatterbait with a razor shad on it with a painted green pumpkin blade. And again, it's an expensive chatterbait. And I did not want to ever spend $23 on a chatterbait. But then some people will be like, oh, you spend $23. You don't need to spend that much on a chatterbait. Well, some guys spend $35 on jerkbaits. Some people have, $90,000 trucks. Yeah. Spending $23 on a chatterbait isn't the worst case in the world. If you're thinking that and saying, wow, you're insane, I'd never spend that much, that's fine. Buy the cheap one. It doesn't matter. They'll still catch fish. The jackhammers do work better. I don't think they work that much better that they're worth the extremely high price. For the
ratio of how it works to how much it costs doesn't stay the same.
Yeah.
But
for the average angler, it's probably not worth it.
Yeah.
If you're a bit of a bougie guy and you want to try some cool baits, 100% I'd recommend.
Or if you really if you have some other chatterbaits, you like them and you want to try it and see the difference. Yeah, like we were talking about, because it has a tungsten head, it has a lot sharper of a vibration on it.
And the thing that I've been trying to do lately is buy less, better baits. So people will be like, oh, you spent $23 on a chatterbait, but then they'll go to the fishing store and just fill their cart with random junk they'll never use and spend $100. I'm like, well, I save money because I bought one thing for $20 that I'm going to use all the time, and you bought a bunch of junk that's going to sit in your box.
Yeah.
So, be smart. Again, the main take home from that is I don't really think the jackhammer for most people is worth the money, but it is a really good bait. But there are tons of different brands that make chatterbaits. Andrew's telling the Berkeley Slobber Knocker.
Yeah. I still want to try that one if it's a slightly different way the blade connects to the jig head. Some of them, they have a split ring, like even this one here, just the River Pirate from, I can't remember his name ever.
Blind Rage Baits.
That's the one.
Yeah.
So it's attached with a split ring, so it doesn't actually hit the head when it vibrates. It doesn't actually make contact with the jig head.
Yeah.
in that design. So there are some slight differences, but it's still a bladed jig. They all primarily work the same.
It's true. So what I would say to people is go to the store, find one that's in your price point or in your budget, pick a color that you have confidence in, tie it on, and catch fish.
And if you look and say, oh, the chatterbait's like looks too big, get the Mini Max. And you can even get some of the small trailers. So let's say you get a Mini Max and get a TRD. Use that as a trailer. Get the small craws, not the Helicross, the one size down from those. I think the TRD craw. Yeah. And you can fit those. They pair perfectly with the Mini Max, and that's an excellent size because you still get a lot of vibration with it, and it's a perfect morsel for a smallmouth.
Oh yeah.
If you are concerned. However, smallmouth have no problem nailing a regular chatterbait or even the big blade chatterbait. They'll annihilate it.
Don't worry about the size. Fish have big mouths. So that's what we're going to cover today for chatterbaits. There's so much you could cover for chatterbaits, but that's kind of what, we've kind of learned and picked up over the years and bought different things and tried different techniques. And it's one of our favorite techniques for a reason because it flat out catches fish. Yeah. And if you're one of those guys that's like, I can't catch fish in chatterbaits, I highly recommend you try again. When the conditions are good, tie on a chatterbait and just keep it in your hand all day. Well, cast it out and reel it in. Yeah. But keep that rod in your hand all day and keep trying, and you will catch fish on them.
And if you want to try and build confidence in something, don't wait until the time where nothing else works. And like, well, I guess I'll try this. And see, it doesn't work. Nothing else worked. So try it in a day. Let's say what Jesse and I like to do is when the fish are hitting anything, we like to build confidence in other baits. So if you're having a good day, throw on a chatterbait and see maybe it'll improve above that.
True. All right, we're gonna go to our next quick segment, which we're going to add to this, even though we're going a little over time. I'm sure you guys won't mind. So we're actually going to do a quick AOA review.
Ooh.
So we've been getting tons of fantastic reviews from you guys from the podcast. And some of them I'm like, you know what? That's such a good review. I want to read it. So I asked the guy if I could read it, and he was like, 100%. So I got this message the other day on our Instagram. If you want to send us a message.
That's like a page and a half.
It's long. So I'm not going to mention this guy. Well, his name's Ethan. We'll just say that. So he said,
Ethan Hawke?
No. So Ethan says, hey, just wanted to thank you guys for your podcast. I live in Kansas and have some local fishing experience with the species here. This year we planned a trip to Quetico Park for canoe fishing. I've been on this trip once before and had relatively low success. This year I figured I wasn't going to canoe 50 miles and not catch fish, so I searched for relevant podcasts and you guys came up. I'm glad that we're actually searchable now.
Yeah.
I made lure lists from the ones you suggested. Smart.
Too bad he's not fishing Ontario. They'll never work. I'm just kidding.
I made lure lists from the ones you suggested and added a few to my tackle box. Husky jerk was my favorite. I also found the fishing line episode especially helpful. Anyway, I feel like I picked up a ton of good insight and made my decisions much less aimless than in the past. We ended up with a super successful trip. The fish happened to bite our baits, and we have had some really good days. Landed a 40-inch pike and a 19 to 20-inch smallmouth, and just had a ton of fun fishing around the park.
40-inch pike. That's way to go. Send a picture of that, please,
yeah.
Ethan. That's
so
we'd love to see that.
We actually get messages like this all the time, but like that one I was like, that's a great message. Yeah. But we're glad that you guys are enjoying the podcast. If you have any experiences like that, definitely send us a message. We love reading them, and maybe you'll get featured next time on our AOA reviews. And in news, just to wrap up this episode, we would like to thank all of you because we just passed 10,000 downloads. 10,000 downloads.
That's awesome.
We had goals, kind of like ideas when we looked up like what to expect, how many downloads to get. And they're like, oh, the first few episodes, you'll get, 30 to 40 downloads. And I was like, well, we're getting 500-600, so that's pretty good. And we're at the point now where we just passed 10,000 downloads, which is fantastic. We're getting, with our YouTube combined, more than 1,500 views.
That's crazy.
On our podcast and our YouTube podcast combined every week. Every week.
That's amazing.
So it makes us happy that all this hard work that we're putting into this podcast and the editing and all the expense, it's reaching people. People are enjoying it.
Yes,
we're getting good
being
reviews.
Appreciated.
And it just makes us, makes us want to keep going. So if at this point, if you haven't given us a review on whatever platform you're watching this on, please give us a review. Give us a thumbs up. It means a lot to us.
If you haven't subscribed, do that too.
Yeah. And we'd just like to mention we have set up a Patreon. A few people have already, donated some money towards helping us with the expenses. If that's something that you'd be interested in, definitely check out the show notes below and it'll take you to that link. So anyway, that's all for today. We did go a little bit over time, by about 10 minutes. That's okay. I'm sure you guys won't call the police on us or anything. Whoop, whoop. But before we stop this show, Andrew asked me to do something earlier, and I said, you know what? Let's do it, because it's a little bit crazy. But, if you're smart, you'll stop the podcast right now. We were fishing the other day, and we were fishing with my nephew who's 10. Now, we don't have kids ourselves, but we do fish a lot with, kids that we're related to, obviously.
We spend time with children.
Yeah. Taking kids fishing. We enjoy doing it.
I've got a nephew as well.
Yeah. So the fishing was a bit slow at the time. So we're trying to keep, my little nephew, entertained. So Andrew started doing his Star Wars impressions. Now, I'm not a huge, I don't know what this guy's name is. Was it Watto?
Watto.
So remember on Star Wars Episode 1. Now you're probably like, this is a fishing podcast. What the heck? But this is how to keep kids entertained when you're fishing. So learn Andrew's impression of Watto.
Well, it all started when we were talking. I forget what we mentioned. He wanted to do something, and I was like, "No, you won't."
Oh yeah, because we saw a jet ski, and if you've watched our podcast a few weeks ago, we talked about how much we hate jet skis and personal watercrafts or whatever they're called. So he's like, "I want a jet ski," and Andrew said,
"No, you don't."
And I was like, I instantly knew it was from Star Wars, and then he did this.
I didn't know how, yeah. Oatmeal.
Which made us laugh, and we actually caught a muskie that trip, so maybe it was a good luck charm.
When I couldn't go fishing back in the day, I was homeschooled, so I used to play this pod racing game. And you go into Watto's junkyard to upgrade your pod racer, and I just learned all the lines.
Again, Andrew had a sad upbringing, but anyway. We'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode. This is episode 16 of the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. Again, please leave us a review and write us a cool review to make us laugh, and we might feature you on the next AOA review. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.